He said it like it was logistics, not exile. A temporary move, as if cities were chess pieces and I was the pawn. I didn't argue. I just opened my contract to clause 4.3 and watched the room temperature drop. The next morning, the word risk echoed through the company louder than my name ever had. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and burnt espresso, the kind of scent designed to suggest stability. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a framed promise. Predictable, profitable, obedient. I stood at the far end of the table, laptop closed, spine straight. Across from me, the COO avoided my eyes as if eye contact were legally binding. "This is a temporary move. You'll relocate," he repeated, smoothing the edge of a printed org chart that still listed my name in bold. Temporary. The word floated between us like a paper lantern, beautiful, hollow, and already on fire. Silence stretched. Not awkward. Strategic. In psychology, they call it persuasion. Create the expectation of authority before you issue the command. The assumption of power is often enough to make people comply. The room expected me to nod, to thank him for the opportunity, to pack quietly. Instead, I opened my laptop. Clause 4.3 sat in my contract like a lighthouse. Intellectual property ownership remains with the creator unless mutually reassigned in writing. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. My relocation, I said evenly, would materially impact control over the IP portfolio, as outlined in Clause 4.3. A flicker. Just one. But I saw it. The general counsel shifted in her seat. Someone coughed. The hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded too loud, like static before a storm. The org chart stopped being a map and started looking like a liability. They hadn't expected me to read the fine print. That was the first crack. I had built the risk architecture for our flagship product. The algorithms, the compliance scaffolding, the insurance alignment strategy. Every data layer was signed, time-stamped, archived. Not because I was paranoid, because I understood something simple. In offices, memory is flexible. Documentation is not. The COO leaned back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let's not overcomplicate this. Overcomplicate. Another soft word. Soft words are often the sharpest knives. Insurance alignment, I continued, as though we were discussing quarterly catering options. Any material change in operational oversight requires disclosure. The word disclosure landed heavier than I intended. Across the table, our CFO's pen stopped moving. Numbers are anchors. In copywriting, they say a precise figure lodges in the mind deeper than any adjective ever could. I didn't mention one yet. I didn't have to. The idea of quantified exposure hovered there, unspoken, waiting. The COO cleared his throat. We're optimizing leadership structure. Optimizing. Another elegant disguise. Outside, the clouds thickened, turning the skyline silver. The city looked less certain now, less obedient. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because here was the truth no one wanted to articulate. If I relocated without formal transfer protocols, our insurer could interpret it as a breach of coverage terms. And insurers don't argue. They calculate. I closed my laptop gently. The click sounded final. I'll need formal documentation, I said, and confirmation from the insurer that coverage remains intact. The word insurer did what my voice never could. It tightened the room. Risk is a neuromarketing trigger. It bypasses pride and goes straight to survival. Mention risk in a corporate setting and watch confidence evaporate. The COO's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The expectation of unquestioned authority, that persuasion spell, began to fracture. Let's reconvene, he said quickly. That was the second crack. By the time I returned to my office, emails were already moving faster than rumor. Legal. Finance. Operations. Subject lines that pretended calm while whispering urgency. Clarification requested. Documentation needed. Exposure scenario review. I stared at the skyline again, this time through my own window. The glass reflected my face back at me. Not angry, not afraid. Focused. They thought relocation was logistics. They forgot it was leverage. An hour later, my inbox chimed. External, insurance domain. My pulse didn't spike. It sharpened. The message was polite, clinical, devastating in its precision. We request clarification regarding operational oversight changes connected to a $2.4 million risk exposure. Potential breach of coverage terms pending review. There it was. The number. $2.4 million? Not rounded, not softened. Anchored. The kind of figure that transforms executive confidence into quiet panic. Down the hall, footsteps moved faster than usual. Doors opened and closed with slightly too much force. Someone laughed, too loudly, the brittle sound of denial. I didn't forward the email immediately. I let it sit. Visibility, like oxygen, can be controlled. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Did you see the insurer's message? The CFO asked, voice lower than before. Yes, I replied. Clause 4.3 requires continuity of IP oversight. Silence. Then, we'll need to review. Review. Another elegant word for reconsider. I looked at the city again. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the air had changed. Authority no longer felt automatic. It felt conditional. And in that condition, that narrow, precise space between assumption and accountability, power quietly shifted. They thought they were moving me across a map. They didn't realize they had moved the board. And if they didn't act carefully in the next 24 hours, the number $2.4 million wouldn't just be an anchor, it would be a headline. You'll want to see what happened when the board finally understood what breach of coverage truly meant. By 8:12 a.m., the building no longer smelled like polished wood and burnt espresso. It smelled like urgency. When I stepped out of the elevator, conversation stopped half a second too late. Screens minimized. Slack notifications were muted with the kind of choreography usually reserved for surprise audits. The word risk had traveled faster than gossip. And unlike gossip, it came with numbers. $2.4 million. Anchors work because the brain clings to precision. No one was debating strategy now. They were calculating exposure. I reached my desk and opened the insurer's email again, reading it the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. Potential breach of coverage terms pending review. The phrase was neutral, almost polite. But in corporate language, neutral is often catastrophic. My phone vibrated before I could sit down. Emergency sync in 10, the CFO said. No greeting, no small talk. Authority, suddenly stripped of persuasion, sounded thinner. In the conference room, the energy had changed. Yesterday, they leaned back. Today, they leaned forward. The COO avoided eye contact again, but this time it wasn't dominance, it was damage control. Walk us through the exposure, he said, folding his hands as if this had always been collaborative. Walk us through. Translation, we underestimated you. I connected my laptop to the screen. The slide deck wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Contracts, timelines, IP chain of custody logs, insurer correspondence, clean, documented, time-stamped. When operational oversight changes, I began calmly. The insurer evaluates continuity of risk management protocols. My relocation without formal reassignment of IP authority may be interpreted as a governance gap. Governance gap. A softer phrase than liability, but heavier than inconvenience. The general counsel interjected. Could we argue that relocation doesn't equal oversight loss? I met her gaze. Only if Clause 4.3 is amended, in writing. Before the operational shift. Silence again. But this time it wasn't strategic. It was a realization. The CFO tapped the table lightly. If coverage is suspended, it doesn't need to be suspended, I said evenly. It only needs to be questioned. Questioned. The neuromarketing trigger fired again. Risk isn't just about numbers. It's about uncertainty. And uncertainty terrifies institutions more than loss itself. The COO exhaled slowly. This wasn't meant to escalate. Escalate. As if I'd raised my voice instead of opening a contract. I didn't escalate, I replied. I disclosed. The word disclosure lingered in the air like a legal incantation. No one argued with disclosure. It's the corporate equivalent of sunlight. Once introduced, you can't pretend the room is dark. Outside the glass walls, employees pretended to work while tracking the meeting through body language alone. Offices are ecosystems. They sense tremors before announcements. The CFO looked at the projected number again. 2.4 million, he murmured, as if saying it softer might reduce it. Precision is unforgiving. I recommend we pause any relocation discussion, I continued, tone steady. Formally notify the insurer of leadership continuity, reconfirm IP oversight alignment, and document the board's acknowledgement of risk exposure. Acknowledgement. The COO's jaw tightened. Authority doesn't like documentation when it's not in control of the narrative. So you're refusing the relocation? He asked. The question was designed as a trap. Emotional, not contractual. I'm protecting the company's coverage, I answered. Not defiant, not defensive, precise. The general counsel nodded almost imperceptibly. Legal minds understand something executives often forget. Contracts are not suggestions. They are architecture. And you don't casually remove load-bearing walls. Another pause? Longer this time. Then the CFO spoke. We cannot afford even a temporary lapse in coverage. There it was. The pivot. The expectation of obedience had fully collapsed. Persuasion had failed. Authority now required alignment, not assumption. The COO straightened his papers again, but the gesture looked rehearsed. We'll reassess the relocation timeline. Timeline, not mandate. Progress rarely arrives with applause. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a calendar adjustment. The meeting ended without a formal decision, which in corporate language often means a decision has already been made privately. As I unplugged my laptop, the CFO leaned closer. Off the record, he said quietly, thank you for flagging this. Flagging, not resisting. Down the corridor, whispers were already shifting tone. Yesterday I was being moved. Today I was being consulted. Perception changes faster than policy. Back in my office, another email arrived from the insurer. A follow-up request for documentation, confirming no governance change had occurred. The phrasing was careful, almost surgical. Confirm no change. The company now had two options: formally declare continuity or admit disruption. Both required signatures. I drafted a brief response, attaching the relevant sections of my contract and the board minutes from last quarter that referenced IP stewardship. Clean, transparent, unemotional. Before sending, I paused. Power doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be recorded. I clicked Reply All. Within minutes, my inbox filled with rapid acknowledgments. Finance, legal, risk. No one used the word relocate anymore. The COO called late in the afternoon. We may need to revisit your strategic role, he said, tone softened by necessity. Revisit. The irony almost made me smile. Yesterday, my position was negotiable. Today, it was critical infrastructure. I'm open to discussion, I replied, with documentation. A beat of silence, then a restrained, of course. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, the building exhaled. The panic hadn't exploded. It had redirected, not toward me, toward accountability. And somewhere between Clause 4.3 and $2.4 million, the narrative had shifted in a way no one could easily reverse. What they still don't know is how much documentation I've archived, and who else is copied on it. Have you ever seen a contract flip a boardroom upside down? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. By Wednesday morning, the office had split into two atmospheres. On one side, polished calm, scheduled meetings, carefully worded emails, smiles calibrated to neutrality. On the other, an undercurrent you could almost taste. Metallic, electric, unfinished. No one mentioned relocation anymore. Instead, my calendar filled with invitations titled Strategic Alignment, IP Continuity Review, and my favorite, leadership synergy discussion. Corporate vocabulary is a magician. It changes the label and hopes you forget the object. I accepted them all. The first meeting was with legal and risk. Smaller room, no skyline, fluorescent lights that hummed like restrained anxiety. The general counsel placed a printed copy of my contract on the table, annotated in yellow. Clause 4.3 is clear, she said, but the board didn't anticipate it applying to geographic reassignment. Anticipation is not a legal defense. IP stewardship isn't geographic, I replied. It's operational. The head of risk tapped a pen against his notebook. The insurer is asking whether any executive decision could be interpreted as destabilizing governance oversight. Destabilizing. That word didn't belong to me, it belonged to them. I haven't changed governance, I said evenly. I asked for documentation before it changed. A pause. Papers shifted. Someone adjusted their glasses. In offices, the quiet moments are the loudest. That's when responsibility decides where to land. The head of risk leaned back. If we submit formal confirmation that oversight remains intact, the insurer will likely close the inquiry. Likely. Corporate optimism always comes with an asterisk. And if you can't confirm that, I asked softly. No one answered immediately, because confirmation requires truth, and truth requires signatures. By the time I returned to my desk, Slack had transformed into a cautious river of compliance updates. Finance wanted updated risk matrices. Operations requested confirmation memos. HR sent a neutral message about ongoing structural evaluations. Structural evaluations. The relocation had evaporated into abstraction, but abstraction leaves traces. Around noon, I received a calendar invite from the COO himself. Subject: private discussion. No assistants copied, no legal. Interesting. His office felt different from the boardroom. Warmer lighting, city view angled like a reward, a bookshelf curated to signal leadership philosophy. He stood when I entered, a gesture he hadn't offered 2 days earlier. I underestimated the downstream impact, he began. Underestimated. There it was, the first real crack in the facade. My intention wasn't to compromise coverage, he continued. We were optimizing leadership structure. Optimizing again, the word refused to retire. Optimization, I said gently, requires alignment with contractual architecture. He watched me carefully now, not avoiding eye contact, evaluating. You're aware this has created internal tension, he said. Tension, as if clarity were aggression. Transparency often does, and I replied, temporarily. The word temporarily hung between us. This time, not directed at me. He exhaled. The board is concerned about perception. Perception. Finally, the real currency. Because the moment the insurer requested clarification on $2.4 million in exposure, perception shifted externally. Investors don't panic over strategy changes. They panic over governance instability. The insurer used the phrase, breach of coverage terms. I reminded him calmly. That language carries weight. He nodded slowly. We'll formally confirm continuity of oversight. No relocation, for now. For now. It was almost poetic. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. Victory in offices is rarely loud. It's procedural. Please ensure the board minutes reflect that decision, I said, and that IP stewardship remains unchanged. He studied me again, not with irritation, but with something closer to recognition. You documented everything before speaking up, he observed. I documented before it was necessary, I corrected. Documentation isn't defense, it's anticipation. When I left his office, the hallway felt different. Not friendly, but recalibrated. People met my eyes longer. A few nodded, subtle acknowledgments of a shift no memo would ever describe. By late afternoon, legal circulated a draft statement to the insurer confirming uninterrupted oversight. The language was precise, intentional, almost reverent. No operational governance changes have occurred. I read it twice before approving. The CFO called shortly after. They're satisfied, he said. Inquiry likely to close pending final confirmation. Likely again, but the panic was gone, replaced by careful compliance. Outside, rain finally began to fall, soft at first, then steady. The city blurred behind the glass. Lights refracted into something softer, less rigid. Power hadn't exploded. It had redistributed. Not through confrontation, through contracts. And yet beneath the restored calm, something else lingered. Because when authority realizes it can be questioned, it doesn't disappear. It recalculates. And I could feel it. Subtle, almost invisible. A new strategy forming somewhere beyond the glass walls. They had withdrawn the relocation. But this wasn't over. By Thursday, the official narrative was almost elegant. Internal memo. Leadership structure remained stable. Board minutes updated. Insurer acknowledged receipt of confirmation. No breach, no lapse, no disruption. On paper, it looked seamless. In reality, the atmosphere had shifted in ways no document could summarize. When authority is challenged, even politely, but it doesn't vanish, it reorganizes. The first sign came in the form of silence. Fewer spontaneous updates. Fewer informal briefings. Conversations that used to include me now arrived polished and post-edited. Inclusion had turned procedural, subtle, strategic. At 9:30 a.m., Finance requested a routine review of cost allocations connected to the IP portfolio. Routine reviews rarely appear in the same week as insurer inquiries. But I welcomed it. The conference room this time had no windows, just a long table and a projection screen glowing faint blue like anticipation. The CFO adjusted his glasses. We're mapping financial dependencies tied to your oversight. Dependencies. Translation. How critical are you really? I pulled up the layered architecture. Compliance timelines, insurer reporting cycles, vendor certifications, intellectual property registration chains. Each element connected to another. Not dramatically, but structurally. Remove one oversight node and several reporting obligations would cascade. Not collapse. Cascade. The portfolio isn't centralized around me, I said calmly. It's centralized around process. I designed the process. The distinction mattered. The CFO nodded slowly. And those processes require your authorization? Not personally, when I replied, but contractually, yes. There it was again. The contract. Not ego, not personality. Paper. Paper frightens power because it outlives it. He leaned back, considering. The board wants redundancy. Redundancy. A word that sounds practical but often masks discomfort. I support redundancy, I said, with documented transfer protocols and insurer pre-approval. The phrase insurer pre-approval landed with quiet gravity. The neuro-linguistic trigger activated again. Risk. Even hypothetical risk changes breathing patterns in a room. Shoulders tighten. Pens pause. We'll explore that, he said carefully. Explore. The meeting ended without tension, but also without resolution. Back at my desk, I noticed something else. More people CC'd on emails. Legal looping in compliance, compliance looping in audit, threads expanding like concentric circles in water. Visibility had increased, and visibility, once expanded, rarely contracts fully. Mid-afternoon, an unexpected message arrived from the general counsel. Can you stop by? Her office was quieter than usual. A single lamp on, blinds half drawn. She didn't waste time. The board is considering creating a formal chief risk and IP governance role, she said. I held her gaze neutral. They don't want another exposure scenario, she continued. The insurer inquiry rattled them. Rattled. The word felt honest. This role, she added carefully, would institutionalize what you're already doing. Institutionalize. That's how organizations apologize without saying sorry. And reporting line? I asked. Direct to the board's risk committee. Not to the COO. The shift was subtle but seismic. I let the silence stretch, not as a tactic, but as respect for the moment. Authority wasn't being destroyed, it was being redistributed through governance. This would require revised contract terms, I said softly. She almost smiled. Naturally. Naturally. As if this had always been the intended outcome. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city shimmered in post-storm light, reflective and sharp. Storms don't erase skylines. They clean them. By evening, rumors were circulating. Not about relocation, but about restructuring at the executive level. Titles floated through Slack like cautious balloons. No one attached my name publicly. But they didn't need to. Perception had already shifted. In the parking garage, as I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed again. An email from the insurer. Final confirmation received. No breach identified. Coverage remains intact. Short, clinical, closed. I sat in the quiet of the driver's seat for a moment longer than necessary. This had never been about winning an argument. It had been about preventing a quiet erosion of structure. The COO hadn't contacted me again that day. Power recalculates in private. And as the board considered formalizing my oversight, one truth became clear. They tried to move me quietly. Instead, they elevated the role they hadn't fully understood. But formal titles come with formal consequences. And someone in that building was about to realize that governance cuts both ways. The official announcement arrived on Monday at 8:03 a.m. Subject line, Governance Enhancement Initiative. The language was polished, almost ceremonial. In response to recent risk alignment reviews, the board had approved the creation of a formal oversight function, Chief Risk and IP Governance Officer, reporting directly to the Risk Committee. No mention of relocation. No reference to $2.4 million. No trace of panic. Institutions rewrite their own history with impressive efficiency. My name appeared halfway down the page. Not dramatic, not highlighted. Simply stated as fact. Effective immediately. For a moment, I stared at the screen, watching the way sunlight reflected off the glass facade across the street. The city looked the same as it had the week before. Traffic moved, coffee carts steamed. People crossed intersections with ordinary urgency. And yet the architecture inside the building had changed. The first message came from compliance, then audit, then two board members, separately, both using the same phrase, long overdue. Long overdue, not bold, not confrontational, just inevitable. At 9 a.m., I walked into the executive floor with a different kind of silence following me. Not tension, not suspicion, calibration. The COO was already seated in the conference room. This time he stood fully when I entered. "Congratulations," he said, voice measured. "Thank you," I replied. There was no irony in it. Only recognition. The board chair joined via video. Her tone was precise. This role formalizes risk continuity. We cannot afford ambiguity in governance structures. Ambiguity. That was the quiet villain all along. I presented a phased plan, insurer alignment checkpoints, IP stewardship redundancy mapping, documented transfer protocols, the very safeguards that had once been considered overcautious. Now they were strategic pillars. No one interrupted, because when risk has already knocked once, doors tend to stay open. Halfway through the meeting, the CFO leaned forward. "Will this require amendments to executive authority boundaries?" It was a careful question. "Yes," I answered. "Clear boundaries prevent silent exposure." Silent exposure. That phrase settled into the room like a truth no one could dispute. The COO's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Authority had not been taken from him. It had been defined around him. Contracts do not humiliate. They delineate. By noon, my inbox had transformed from reaction to coordination. Insurer touchpoint scheduled, risk committee briefing confirmed, external counsel looped in for documentation review. The system had adapted. Later that afternoon, I received a final, quiet message from the COO. "We should have consulted you earlier. No defensiveness, no justification. Consulted." I read it twice before replying. Alignment works best before assumptions. I didn't add anything else. As the week unfolded, something subtle but undeniable occurred. Decisions slowed down, not from fear, but from process. Proposals came with documentation attached. Strategy decks included compliance slides from the beginning. Risk was no longer an afterthought, it was a lens. Persuasion had been replaced by structure. In the break room on Friday, I overheard two managers discussing the insurer inquiry. Imagine if that had gone unnoticed, one whispered. It hadn't, and that was the point. I stood by the window that evening, watching the city shift into dusk. The skyline glowed, steady, resilient, indifferent to internal politics. They had tried to move me quietly. Instead, they reinforced the architecture I had built. There was no applause, no dramatic confrontation, no revenge. Only documentation, alignment, governance. Power hadn't changed hands. It had matured. And somewhere between Clause 4.3 and a $2.4 million anchor, the company learned a lesson more durable than authority. Risk doesn't destroy organizations. Ignoring it does.